Hello BookTube, this is going to be our Femuary or February 2018 wrap-up. I am Sadie and this is the SadieRuin Reads podcast or vlog or whatever you want to call it. And I was just at the dentist, yay. Okay, I'm going to do these in the order that I read them, and that seems to be the way I feel like doing it this month. And I will tell you which ones I enjoyed and which ones I didn't. I don't think there are any that I didn't this month. Now, it was Femuary, so I did try to read more women. There was 2 that I had already started that I wanted to finish that were not written by women. So those are not, so while they are read in February, they are not part of my Femuary, if you will. The first one I finally read is Goth by Otsuichi. And so Goth is a group of short stories that are connected by the main characters. The main characters in all the short stories are the same 2 people. One we know is Marino, who I thought was going to be the main character throughout the book, but it turns out she is not. It is actually a boy whose name we find out is, I believe it's Itsuichi, or Itsuchi. We find out about him. Seriously, Kachansky, my cat. Tell you my cat. Hold on a second, BookTube. I must grab a cat. Come here. Come here. Fuzz bucket. Okay. So, Marino, who we thought was going to be the main character, who is around for a lot of them, is not actually the main character. It's written from the point of view of the boy, Otsuichi, or Otsuchi, or Isuki, or... His name is only mentioned once, so it's really hard to remember who he is, except that he is a constant, horribly unreliable narrator. And each of the stories revolves around a death. And so in the city where these guys live, there are constantly serial killers and weird death things happening, so they want to know more about it, and they end up insinuating themselves into murders and making themselves really attractive to serial killers to try and get to figure out how they tick. I loved this book. There's not a lot of gore, so if you're not into gore, that's great. If you like Shirley Jackson and that kind of warpedness, it's good. It takes it just a step further. It's very close to, I would say this guy probably read a lot of The Ring growing up. Or at least a lot of Koji Suzuki's work. I did skip one short story, it's called Dog, and I did not want to read it because I can't handle that. Everything else was really quite interesting. The first short story, we have Marino, who starts to dress and act like a victim because they found the notebook of a serial killer, and she wants to know who the serial killer is, so she starts emulating victims, which is really warped. And in that story, there is a fair bit of gore described, and I think if you were to go off that and assume that the rest of the book goes that way, you would be sorely mistaken. There's one other really gory story, and that would be, I believe, The Voice. I believe it's The Voice, where there is a fair bit of gore described, because in that scenario, the killer is tormenting the sister of the person he killed previously, and describes the way the previous sister was killed and disemboweled, and that's a bit much. But each of the short stories is really well written. It's really messed up. It's really screwed up in the head. So if you enjoy a good screwed up horror fiction, Japanese horror fiction, then yeah, I don't know why people don't know more. I don't know why this isn't as big as The Ring, because it is good. Now, I do know that a movie was made after this. This also includes another short story that was never published. This was originally published in 2 or 3 separate, I think 3 separate times. Goth Yoru no Sho, Goth Boku no Sho, Goth I'm not going to try that, but that was just when they published the individual short story. These are all translated works. The first, let's see, who's translated all of these? They're individually translated different. The first group was translated by Andrew Cunningham. The second group was translated by Andrew Cunningham. The extra short story, Merino Souvenir Photo, was translated by Jocelyn Allen at Viz Media. So, yeah. Just, if you like weird, gothy horror fiction, and the short stories, I'm not a big fan of short stories. I've said it before. I'm getting there where I actually don't hate them anymore, but this reads more like a really disjointed novel because it's all the same people all the time. So, loved it. We'll pick up more of his work because it's awesome. There's a couple of works he's also written that I want to pick up, so I'm excited for those. I have to look at the order here. Okay, so next I read Into the Water by Paula Hawkins. It was a free Book of the Month club. When I re-upped my subscription, they sent it to me for free. She wrote Girl on the Train. It was an okay story. Premise is a bunch of people who live in a city. There's a area, the drowning pool, which people die, and there's some mystery. And it was good. It was a decent read. It was a quick read. It grabbed me and it made me turn the pages. I don't actually remember most of what happened. And there was some dating back into previous times, and someone was writing a book. But generally, if I don't remember it this close after reading it, I don't really care about it. And so I would say that if you wanted to read something that is very quick and driven and mysterious, but you just want like brain candy, then this would be good. But otherwise, I was indifferent to it the whole time I was reading it. I cared for like 5 minutes. Then, and I believe, like, I have one ebook that I read that I have to try and figure out when I finished that. Okay. So, after that one, okay. Then I picked up, there's a Man Bookering group on Goodreads, and this was their January pick, so of course I read it in February. And it's Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, which of course is the story of Thomas Cromwell, his rise to power, his dealings with Henry VIII. This starts with Thomas Cromwell being a child. We see him move into the royal court as the underling, I guess, of... You know, I should care more about what the dude's name was, because he keeps referencing him afterwards. This is how much I cared about him. What's his name? Either way, he's killed. Wolsey? I think it's Wolsey. He's killed really early on, but he brought Thomas Cromwell into the court, and then Thomas Cromwell has to become his own man. Henry VIII takes him kind of as an advisor. We see Catherine, the current queen, when the book is starting, is falling out of favor. She's not produced a male heir, and Boleyn is really doing her tricks and getting Henry to agree to marry her and cast off Catherine, and of course the exile of Catherine's daughter Mary. Very historically accurate. It was a bit of a plod. I would say what I found was that the first bit where we have Thomas Cromwell becoming Thomas Cromwell and then becoming someone at court, that I could have lived without that entirety. That was like 200 pages and I could have cared less. And then at about this is a 600 page copy, at about the 250, 300 page mark, I started really getting into it. It started getting really good. And that's when I actually started to care about things that were happening. So, in terms of this has won a Man Booker, won the 2009 Man Booker. Everybody says it's amazing and everybody falls at its feet, and I can understand why they do it. And I think I would have liked it more if I hadn't fallen for the hype. I wanted it to be more than it was in the beginning, and it sucked, and then it got really good at the end. So maybe it's the end that people are judging it by. Either way, if you know anything about Henry VIII, the Tudors, histories, the Plantagenet, I am not British, the Plantagenets, or Thomas Cromwell and Wolsey, then you're going to understand what's going to happen right off the get-go. The writing is really beautiful, and I enjoyed it. In the end, I think I gave it 4 stars, but the first half could have been omitted for me. Then on audiobook, which was part of like what I set out for myself to do. Oh, and that was my one book over 500 pages. Was this guy who came in at 604 pages. Because I'm trying to read one 500 plus book a month. But I actually got 2 done this month because I finished The Crown of Swords, which I was listening to on audiobook, but I also have the series because I like reading the hard books. My husband likes listening to them. And I decided to start listening to it when I was recovering from surgery and subsequently finished it. I'm starting the next one. My goal this year is to finish at least 3 in the series, so if I do that by audiobook, I think that's a win. They're really great for falling asleep to. However, I will say, I had to listen to certain parts several times because I forgot what would happen or what had happened. I'm not really going to give you a synopsis because it's book 7 in the Wheel of Time series, and if I do, there's going to be spoilers, and really, who needs that? It's a giant friggin' series. There's a million of them. Someday I'll finish it. And then, I know this is when I finished my book that I had started. So the Robert Jordan, of course, was not written by a woman, but I had started that back in January, so that was not part of Femuary. Wolf Hall, Hilary Mantel, written by a woman. And then I finished on my Kindle Call the Nurse, True Stories of a Country Nurse on a Scottish Isle by Mary J. MacLeod, forward by Lady Claire MacDonald of MacDonald. And that's what the cover looks like. It was a very whimsical book. I think that for what I needed, it was perfect. It was a nonfiction. I was looking for something nonfiction. And I wanted to really just take myself out of my mind. And so it's the remembrances of a nurse who moves to this remote Scottish isle that she names completely different than what it is to keep the islands like anonymous and to keep the people there anonymous. So everybody's been renamed, the island's been renamed, and we see her husband, and her 2 children move to the island to escape the trappings of the city. They want to live off the grid. So they end up buying this little ramshackle house. He is good at electrician-y stuff, so he ends up starting to hook up cable and power in the homes on this remote isle, and she is a country nurse. And so we get some really interesting stories that are, some are completely heartbreaking. There's one of finding a woman who has been kept chained to a bed for the majority of her life. People thought she had died, and it was because she had a child out of wedlock, and later on we find the child completely somewhere else, who was raised an orphan. And then there's some lightheartedness, like when they go to the sheep shearing and everybody gets to take some of the fleece, and her son gives it a go, and it's a remembrance of a specific time that this woman nurse lived on the isle and everything that happened, and the cast of colorful characters that lived there. We also see, I'm not really familiar with it, but I guess in the Scottish Highlands, they cleared them out at some point. They tried to flush them back in. So we see, as the reader, we get the remembrance of her watching like the last 6 people who lived on this one remote island move into the inner islands, which for them is like moving into the city, even though these islands are super remote. And she remarks that like that's the death of this island, because these 6 people who were the last families who are living there are now gone, and that no one's ever going to go back out there again. And it was a really good read. It was really well written, and I recommend it if you're interested in that kind of thing, at nature writing. people who live different lifestyles, nursing issues in remote places. There are some seriously interesting nursing instances that I really enjoyed. So I finished that, and that was a part of Femuary, and that was really awesome. The last book I finished in February, which I think gave me like 6 finishes. Yeah, 6 books in February, which is, I'm happy with that. I'm not going to complain about it. My goal is to read bigger books, or to read as many bigger books as I can, not necessarily to pad the numbers. And then because I had read Wolf Hall, I had a copy of Bringing Up the Bodies, which is the follow-up by Hilary Mantel. This won the Booker in 2012, and I got this one on a book outlet sale. Because I had picked up Wolf Hall at a used bookstore, and I figured I would probably want to read the second one, and whoo bippy. Can I just say that while Wolf Hall was kind of a disappointment to me, I don't know why this one doesn't have the praise that Wolf Hall does. I adored this one. Now, it is a chunker, but it only comes in at 400 and change, like 408. Comes in at 408 pages, but oh my goodness, is this so much better. If you've read Wolf Hall and you haven't read this, I don't know why, but also if you read Wolf Hall and you were like, oh goodness, read this one. Maybe not this edition, pick any edition you want, but read Bringing Up the Bodies. In this one, we're still getting everything from the view of Cromwell. I'm told that I actually looked it up, and this is called number 2 in the Cromwell series. Apparently there's a 3rd one coming out, and I'm going to be all over that, like, you know what. But, so this follows Cromwell. We pick up where we left off. Anne Boleyn has produced Elizabeth, but she has not produced a male heir. She's trying, but she's failing miserably, and Henry is getting so bored. And, oh, Anne. Anne tries and fails. Oh, how she tries and fails. She fails at life. I've never... Particularly to women of my age bracket, we have a thing for Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth. Those tend to be the women we go after. We really don't have a lot of love for Catherine of Aragon or Jane Seymour or any of them. But in this one we see the fall of Anne Boleyn, and man, it's not pretty. And I loved every second of watching her fall. I loved Cromwell's orchestrations. I loved the intrigue of the court. And we see Jane Seymour, and one thing that Steve Donahue had mentioned, he got a book about Jane Seymour, and he said that she's written very differently here than she usually is. And I haven't read a lot about her, so I don't know that she's written a lot differently, but her character in here is very intriguing. And just watching Henry go after Anne and get rid of her after he spent like 7 years getting this woman, he just throws her away. So, yeah. And of course there's the beheading. We get a good beheading. Everybody needs a beheading, right? And I love this book. This book was everything Wolf Hall I wanted Wolf Hall to be. And so, yes, this is a highly recommending book. And that is everything I finished in February. I'm on to my March, and I'm doing March Mystery Madness once I finish what I've got going on. And yes, so I will see everybody in a little bit. Bye.